Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the series What If Naruto Gained the Knowledge of Everything Part 5. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
As Deidara and Hidden flew above the quiet village, they looked at the horizon. As soon as the last bit of light was gone, Deidara let go of the weird-looking creature. As they watched it fall to the ground, Hidden jumped from his own bird towards the target they were told to get. Deidara just stood there and watched as his creature suddenly grew into a huge white blob that looked like a very fat bird. Even before it hit, he could hear the screams, which made him smile a little. When his idea hit, nothing happened but silence. Then he was briefly blinded by a flash of light, and then he felt a loud explosion through his bird. He smiled when he saw ninja work together to get to the point of impact to save people. He jerked his hands forward and made two more things. Both of them grew into different creatures that shot forward like missiles and headed straight for most of the people. He didn't need to hide anymore, so he flew down on his clay bird and started throwing out smaller creatures that still had enough power to kill a target. And then some. He turned and moved to avoid the weak jutsu that was thrown at him, and he kept attacking both shinobi and regular people. He jumped off his clay bird just as two spears stuck it through the ground. He made another one quickly and looked for the source of the attack. Kuretsuchi, the Yondaime Tsuchikage, was the one he saw. Deidara smiled and dodged the next round of rocks she threw at him. He answered with a round of clay creatures. Break. Hidden climbed up the side of the mountain using his sickle. When he got to the top, he hid in the bushes while a group of people were being led by two Chunin to a shelter outside of the village. The two led the group into a cave and got ready to block the entrance with a rock. Before they could, Hidden used his sickle to cut off the head of one of them. He could only bite the arm of the other one. The man didn't know it, but that was all he needed. By making hand gestures, his skin turned black and the shape of what looked like a skeleton appeared on it. He took out some kind of black rod from somewhere on his body and stuck it through his own heart. The man tried to stop the blood from pouring from his wound, and Hidden turned to the cave. He walked into the house without any hurry, dragging his sickle behind him. When he got there, he saw a few people who looked wealthy and a few who seemed to have been lucky enough to be nearby when the attack started. People gasped when they saw him because they knew he was an enemy. "Good evening, you snobs," he said in an oddly excited way. He said it in a casual way. "I'm here to get someone important. This looks like the VIP bunker, so I'm sure she's here," he thought to himself as he walked back and forth and looked into the scared eyes of everyone there. He seemed much creepier as he ignored the rumbles and booms of explosions in the distance. A middle-aged man in clothes that looked expensive tried to get out of the room because the tension was getting to him. He thought he had it because he was the one closest to the entrance of the cave. Before he could take more than 2 steps, Hidden stuck him in the back with his sickle. The bottom blade went right through his chest. The second blade cut through the base of his neck and stuck out in front of his face. And the top blade went all the way through the top of his head. He waved his finger and said, as he kept looking around. "Can't have you scumbags leaving on me now. It's not that I couldn't let you go, I just don't want to." His eyes stopped on a woman in her early 20s with long brown hair and green eyes. She seemed to be fairly wealthy, which was exactly what he wanted. "Ah," he said, making his way through the crowd to get to her. "Makatsuchi?" he asked. The girl quickly shook her head no and moved back, trying to sink into the rock behind her. Her eyes were all over the place as she tried to look at something else and get him to leave her alone. Hidden could tell she was lying, and he could have just taken her, but he decided to have a little more fun. He stood up and said, "Well, that's a shame." No one else tried to run for the door because they were afraid to move. Hidden put the sickle on his shoulder. He shrugged and said, "I guess I'll just have to start killing people until I find out who Makatsuchi is." He turned to the man, other than the one he had already killed, who was closest to the door. The man saw what he was going to do and tried to get away. "No, it's her. No," he yelled just before Deidara cut his head off. When the others saw it roll across the floor, they screamed in shock. He looked around for the answer to the question he hadn't even asked. He put out his hands and laughed. Really? Nobody moved. No one moved. He shook his head and said, "Well, fuck me, I thought you people cared. How cruel," he said as he raised his gun and got ready to drop it on the next person, who, to everyone's horror, turned out to be the shell-shocked son of the last victim, who was not even 10 years old. "Hold on," yelled a woman. Hidden looked at the girl he already knew was Makatsuchi. "It's me. Please, it's me," she said, her voice filled with fear. "Please don't hurt me." She was clearly about to cry so hard she would pass out. Hidden still had his sickle held high over his head. He looked at all the hopeful faces in the room. He then looked down at the kid, whose head was down, whom he was about to kill. "What the hell, I already brought it up," he said. Then, with a horrible impalement sound, he broke the kid's head in two. The horrible thing that happened made everyone in the room stop talking. Even after he got what he wanted, he wouldn't let a child live. When Makatsuchi gave herself up, they had a brief moment of hope. Hidden let out a sigh as if the job was so hard. "Huh, believe me, you little shithead. I did you a favor," he said as he walked back to the girl, who was now crying hysterically on the ground and trying to get away. Hidden went up to her and got down on his knees in front of her. He told her, "Oh, stop crying already, damn it," and then put her to sleep. When he was done, he stood up and looked around at the other people, who were either crying or standing still in shock, unable to speak. He put Makatsuchi on his back and turned to go. He said as he left, "Well, this has been a shitload of fun, but I have to go. You fucks have a nice day." People were still reeling from what had just happened, but in a selfish way, they were glad to live to see another day. So they thought, "Hope you die." People looked up at the top of the cave when they heard a whizzing sound and saw paper tags that were about to blow. Their screams were stopped by a loud boom that Hidden could feel even as he fell off the side of the cliff with Makatsuchi on his back. Kusama laughed as the sun went down. He looked at Zabuza, who gave him a nod of the head. The two men jumped away, ready to start their mission. Kusama shuned right into the middle of the village. He looked around and saw everyone staring at him in fear and amazement. After he finished making his hand signs, he opened his mouth and a steady stream of water shot out. It filled the area so quickly that the unfortunate civilians around him were all drowning in an unnatural bubble of water. It was huge and looked like it took up several blocks. Kusama laughed as his body seemed to get bigger and more shark-like. From inside, he made hand signs one after the other to send random attacks that came out of the bubble of water where some civilians were drowning. Water dragons, shark bombs, and shock waves were all being thrown in different directions around the village, which caught the attention of many shinobi. He watched as people outside of his bubble tried to save civilians in the battle area, and those who were stupid enough to jump and tried to save people who were drowning. Then, a few ANBU came up to him and seemed to think they were good at fighting in water. He smiled and swam faster than they could follow, easily tearing them apart. He made more hand signs and sent more and more dangerous jutsu out of the sides of his bubble. His destructive reign of terror was accompanied by a sick laugh. He swam to the surface and saw someone he was excited to fight. He had a shark skin in one hand and a big blade in the other. He looked at the Mizukage. Kusama laughed and sat down again. Break. As Zabuza rushed toward his goal, he cut through yet another guard. He had just seen the new Mizukage, a young man with blue hair and glasses, walk out of the building and tell everyone to protect her with your life. He knew he was in the right place because he had just seen that. He wasn't happy with how skilled the shinobi he'd met so far were. Only one of them put up a decent fight, and it only lasted for about 20 seconds. As he turned another corner, he slid down to avoid the sword that was just inches from cutting off his head. He looked the young swordsman in the eyes and turned around. The young man held his shaking sword up to Zabuza's face and tried to stay calm. Zabuza moved forward slowly until the man decided to give it a try. Zabuza pulled his huge blade up and easily blocked the blow. "You're not good enough to be a swordsman," he said as he cut him in half down the middle. After that, he turned and ran away, ignoring the shaking of the building as he threw his sword in front of him. With a grunt, it stabbed whoever was on the other side of the wooden door. Zabuza ran up to the door, kicked it open, and grabbed the handle of his sword to pull it out. He wiped the blood off of it and didn't pay any attention to the dead man slumped against the door. He jumped to avoid getting cut by the man to his left. He checked out the room from above. There were 3 enemies left, and the desk chair was spinning, which meant someone had jumped out of it. He wrapped his sword around the neck of the man who tried to attack him through the hole in his sword. When he landed, he dropped down to avoid the man behind him's overhead strike. He pulled the man and his sword over him, so the man who cut at him caught him. By the time he got there, Zabuza had already kicked his sword through both of them. Before he could get his sword, the last would-be swordsman rushed him and slashed at him wildly with his blade while shouting a war cry. It was a very sad attempt to use any kind of weapon at all. Zabuza grabbed him by the wrist and kicked him in the arm. He then put the part back around his neck and put him in a position that was like an arm bar in reverse. Then he dropped down to the ground, taking him with him. Zabuza's legs were on top of the man's face, which was flat on the ground. He broke the man's arm with a quick move of his body, which made him drop his sword. Zabuza got up and grabbed the screaming man's sword, which he used to pin the man's head to the ground. As Zabuza sighed and pulled his bloody weapon from the bodies of the 2 dead men on the floor, the room fell silent. He put it on his shoulder and followed the sound of scared breathing that was hard to make out. He turned the wooden desk over easily, revealing the scared woman underneath. She tried to get away from him, but he just stood there and looked at her. Then he stuck his sword into the ground next to him. Ino jumped to another roof and put another paper bomb there before going to another roof to do the same thing again. Nearing sunset, she had planted a lot of them all over the city. For her plan, she needed them. When she was ready, she went back to where she was supposed to meet Pekura. Pekura asked her shyly, "Are you ready?" He was afraid she might still be upset from their last conversation, which ended with the masked blonde making a very angry statement. She smiled and gave a thumbs up as she said, "All set. Let's go crazy." Pekura gave her a strange look, but he nodded anyway. There was only a tiny bit of light left. Pekura jumped off the wall in the direction of her goal and said, "I'm going." Ino didn't answer as she sat on the edge, watching the sunset and swaying her feet to a tune in her head. When it was time to do something, she stood up and spread out her body. "All right, it's time to make my love proud," she said as she looked down at the village. She made a few hand gestures and then pulled her mask up a little to show her soft lips. When she kissed the air, a concentrated ball of light shot out of her mouth in the shape of an arch and flew high and far toward the center of the village. For a moment, it looked like it just vanished into the city. Ino waited for the end result with no hurry. Then, with a bright flash, there was an explosion, followed by a loud boom that shook the ground where she was standing. She cheered loudly as the building fell until a Chunin on patrol saw her. She stopped her praising shouts and took a scroll out of her bag. After she opened it, she found a sword inside. She ran up to the boy who was trying to make signs with his hands. She threw her sword into the middle of his chest before he could finish. She rushed toward him and grabbed it from his body. Then she jumped and shot a pretty big fireball at the village below. When it hit, she jumped from up high to avoid the puppet that was coming at her. When she looked for the attacker, she saw that it was Kenkuro using his own puppet. Under her mask, Ino gave a smirk and ran through the village, getting more and more dangerous as she went. Break. Pekura jumped through the window of the building she thought the target was in. As she went further in, she made a few hand signs, and as she walked, 3 balls of fire wrapped around her body. She was running down a hall when she heard footsteps coming down the path next to her. She just pushed one of the balls forward with her mind, and it went right through the man's body. He fell to the ground and looked like all the water in his body had left him. She quickly picked up the body and put it in a nearby closet. She could hear several steps coming from above her, but based on her time here, she thought they were soldiers. She kept running and jumped up to the ceiling to avoid hearing a voice she thought she knew. It was Gara, the Kazekage. He was walking down the hall with a man who seemed to be his advisor. They were talking about the current attack. He asked in a hurry how much damage has been done. The man with brown hair sped up to keep up with the man with red hair. The attacker has destroyed a big part of the market district and killed a lot of civilians and a few shinobi, he told them. Kenkuro-sama is giving chase right now, he said as they went around the corner. Pekura was impressed by how destructive her partner could be. She thought she would be a little more gentle in battle, maybe use speed instead of strength to win a fight. She wasn't sure she could play the role of the distraction, but it's clear that her worries were unfounded. But if the Kazekage was coming, she would have to hurry. She got back on the floor and ran as fast as she could down the hall and around the corner. At the end of this hall was a room that was only used for important meetings that couldn't be talked about in front of people who didn't need to know. A great place for the Kazekage to hide important things. She threw a kunai with an explosive tag on the end before she got to the door. The door was blown open, and the old council members were still sitting in their seats. These were the same jerks who tried to kill her years ago. She didn't care about that because she had a job to do. When one of them saw her come in from the smoke, he or she became worried right away. He stopped when she jumped over their table and blew the door behind them off its hinges. Inside, a woman was feeding a child. When the men at the table saw what she was going to do, they stood up. "She wants the nephew of the Kazekage," yelled one of them. As Pekura changed the shape of the chakra balls around her, she had no time for small talk. She sent one out and drained the woman who had put the child down in front of her. The woman fell to the ground, exhausted, and quickly ran to the crib where she had just put the baby. She turned around and threw another one of her balls into the room after picking him up. She stood next to the door and waited. When she threw the ball into the room, it turned into a mist that quickly killed the 5 men who were still there. As soon as it did, she ran away while looking down at the dirty men she passed. She broke out of the first window she saw as she ran back down the hall. She jumped away from the building with the baby on her back to keep it from getting hurt. As she ran along the top of the village wall, she looked inside to see how bad the damage was. The city was in terrible shape. She could see sand tendrils moving toward the masked blonde, but the Kazekage was too fast and agile to catch her. She made a copy of herself and sent it to tell her they were done and needed to leave. She didn't want to tell the Kazekage what this mission was really about. She couldn't let him see the bundle because she was afraid he would run after it. Break. Pakura's clone made it to the middle of the chaos and threw an explosive kunai at the sand tendril that was coming down on the blonde, who was still getting better. When Ino looked up, Pakura had nothing in his hands. The woman with green hair just gave her a nod and vanished in a puff of smoke. When Ino got the message, she stopped in a crouch. She smiled behind her mask as she looked at the man with the sand. She said, "This was fun, Kazekage-sama," in a cute way that was creepy given how many people she had killed. Gaara looked very angry, and the sand behind him seemed to bubble along with his anger. He asked, "Why have you done this?" Ino just shrugged. She said, "How about I tell you later," while blowing a kiss to him with her hand. "You're not going anywhere," he said, holding up his sand in a threatening way. Ino made a hand sign and smiled. "Oh, I think I am," she said. Gaara's eyes got bigger because he didn't know if she was lying or not. "You have a village to save," she said, and at the same time she set off the tags she had put all over the village before leaving. Gaara turned around to see everything going off. He looked over his shoulder and couldn't decide what to do. Should he chase her down, or keep his people safe? He made his choice against his will and flew toward any place where he heard people calling for help. He told every shinobi near him to help get the injured people to safety. Pakura stood on the other side of the wall and waited until she heard a lot of explosions. Ino jumped down and started running with her while giggling with joy. "Hehe, we did it," she yelled with joy as they left. Pakura was cautious around the girl, but he ran with her anyway. 5 people in charge who had just finished a mission hung out in the meeting room and talked about how good it felt to do something. They had both attacked at the same time a week ago, and they were still waiting for the women to come back. Naruto was not with the group. Instead, he chose to read a book while sitting on the throne that looked out over the main room. He was thinking about what to do next. One more thing had to be done before they were ready. It would be the most work, but also the most rewarding to finish. When he reached a part of the book that made him think, he read it out loud. War is just a stepping stone in humanity's struggle to survive, not just in the most basic way, but also in comfort and with pride. It made sense. People are selfish, driven by pride and the need to have more than everyone else. More power, more brains, more money, more land, more lovers. All of this was just a pointless goal to keep people from seeing the truth. That being true, Ino yelled, "Hi, love, we're back," as she landed on the throne next to him. Behind his mask, Naruto smiled and looked at her. "Ah, at last," he said, putting his book away and standing up. He put out his hand for her to take, and she did so with grace. "Did you get the target back?" She hugged his arm and said, "Yes, but Pakura did it. I was just a distraction." Naruto turned and looked at her. "Where were you?" he asked rhetorically, and she answered by nodding her head against his arm. She said with excitement, And love, my kiss of doom worked." Naruto sped up a little less. He grabbed her mask and said, "I thought I told you I don't like it when you use that. The last time you did that, you almost killed yourself." He scratched his hand. She said it in a casual way while shrugging her shoulders. "I've got it now." She nodded and said, "I can do it from up to 50 feet away now." Naruto gave a shrug. He said, "Well, if you say so," and then he started walking again. As she always did, Ino ran up to him and jumped on his back. Naruto put his hands under her knees and carried her to the meeting room while she played with his slicked back hair again. It was very wet, even though it was slicked back. It looked like he was always taking a shower. When they got to the meeting room, the other people were still talking about the missions they had finished. They were all excited about what would happen next, even though they knew that nothing would happen for a few months. So, that's what they thought would happen. "Get ready," Naruto said as he tilted his head so that Ino, who no longer had a mask on, could attack his neck without any trouble. "In an hour, we'll be ready for the last part of the preparations," he said, and then he turned to leave. Pakura asked the group, "What's the last part?" Naruto turned around and looked at them as if he knew what was going on. He said, "Of course, Konoha. We're all going," and then walked down the hall. The 6 people in charge all looked at each other. Hidden stood up and laughed. "Oh, I love this fucking guy." The others didn't say anything, but they all stood up with a smile or a laugh, showing that they were also very happy. Break. Naruto and Ino walked down a hall that led to the area where the 4 people who had been taken were being held in a cell. Well, the 3 who were able to take care of themselves. A few rooms away, one of the army women was taking care of the Kazekige's nephew. Naruto put Ino down, and the 2 of them just walked around the cell until they got to the front. When they looked inside, the 3 people who had been hurt jumped away from the bars. The woman Zabuza and Kasama had taken from Kiri yelled, "What do you want?" Naruto did nothing but look at her. "Hello, Rai-sama," he said in a friendly way. He walked around in front of their cell and said, "You must be wondering why you're all here." Even after she yelled, she was still very scared and had her back against the wall. She even tried to block Naruto from seeing the child, showing how much she cared for him. "I'm so sorry, but you're here because of your fiancé. I need him to accept my invitation, and if I have you, he'll come running." He was next on Makatsuchi's list of people to talk to. "Then, why am I here?" she asked in a shy voice, even though she already knew the answer. Naruto just shrugged. "Hidden told me that everyone knows you, Kuretsuchi, to be the closest friend of the Tsuchikage," he said. "At least, that's what the informant told him," Makatsuchi said, but she didn't say anything else because she knew that lying wouldn't help. Naruto just started walking again. Rai asked in fear, "What are you going to do to us?" as she pushed the little boy with dark skin further behind her. Naruto looked at her sideways. "Nothing. Like I said before, you're only here to get your fiancé to come." As Rai slid down the wall, she started crying even more hysterically. "When the time comes, Rai-sama. Until then, stay here and let this man know if you need anything," he said, grabbing a passing soldier. Standing in front of their leader, the man looked like he couldn't believe his eyes. "Yes, sir," he shouted and saluted. Naruto patted him on the shoulder and walked back with Ino. Break. After a few minutes, the group of dangerous ninjas stood in the field above their base. Naruto turned to face them and said, "Now. The attack must happen now, and we have to get there as soon as possible. It takes about 10 days for a message to get from Suna to Konoha, so we have about 3 days to beat it there," he said with a deadpan tone. Deidara threw out some clay and said, "Oh, we can do that without any trouble." It grew into a huge dragon that was big enough to carry all of them. Before going on, Naruto seemed to thank him by giving him a nod. "We're all going because Konoha is strong," he said. He could see that some of them were offended right away, but he quickly calmed them down. As a country, they don't have the most shinobi on the list, but as individuals, they do. Everyone will have to play the distraction except Ino, who will get the target. "Gotcha, hun," said Ino from next to him. As everyone got on top of the clay thing, Naruto looked at them. "We're going to attack without mercy and do as much damage as we can. Keep the focus on the main battlefield and away from the goal," he said, looking down at the ground, which was getting smaller and smaller as they went up. Then, at Deidara's order, they took off through the sky at high speed. Menma and Shikamaru were looking out at the clear day from the roof of the Hokage Tower. He was going over everything they had found, hoping that Shikamaru would see things differently. "Ino, so she's still alive," he said with a serious face as he thought about his old teammate. Menma knew much more about what he was going through than anyone else. His brother did it. His very own blood and flesh. Even though it didn't seem like it in the past, they were much closer to each other before they started training. It was the kind of crush that most kids have on their older siblings. Mito did the same thing, but in a different way. There were 2 of them. He could remember climbing into Naruto's bed when he had a bad dream or jumping on him and breaking his ribs to wake him up in the morning. Back then, things were much better. Back then, the 3 Namikaze children were always together. When he thought that his own selfish decision to start training was what caused everything to go wrong, he thought it was crazy. If he had waited until after they graduated from the academy, as they had planned, his mother and father might have trained Naruto while they were kids. But instead, they were only paying attention to him and Mito, leaving Naruto on his own. Menma wondered for a while, back when Naruto was a chunin and they were going on their training trip with Jiraiya and his mother, why Naruto was so forgiving of them. He didn't worry about it when he was younger. His young mind only thought about things going back to normal, and Naruto was a part of normal. By the time he got to the academy, he was so proud of his brother that he told everyone how good he was all the time. Of course, Itachi Uchiha's brother Sasuke always overshadowed him. On the trip out of the village, he grew up and learned more about the world, no matter what. When he did, he thought back to the days when they wouldn't see Naruto for days, then weeks, and then never again. It was the first time he really understood why he sometimes came home to find his mother crying alone. He knew what neglect was, but he couldn't think of how it could hurt someone. So why did his brother think it was fine? Menma was sure that if it were him in that situation, he wouldn't be so carefree. Even from miles away, he saw him in a new way. At that moment, he thought that Naruto couldn't be broken. He was both mentally and physically too strong to be held back by anyone or anything. Then, about halfway through their trip, they heard that Naruto Namikaze had been caught. The trip was cancelled right away, and the 4 of them ran home to find out what was going on. Menma was shocked when he came back and saw that Sasuke had a cold shoulder and seemed to hate him. He didn't find out what happened until a long time after the fact. Itachi Uchiha was killed by Naruto, Who used the snake Sanin to do it? Even hearing about it broke my heart because I knew how close the two were. It seemed like Sasuke would never forgive him, but after their fathers made up, Fugaku must have talked to Sasuke about how he was wrong to be so angry. He didn't like Naruto at all, though, and Menma knew that. It was only natural for people to feel that way. Even though they were friends, he was set on getting his brother out of jail for something that wasn't his fault. He knew everything Shikamaru was going through and even more. Menma asked him, "What do we do?" as he held onto the railing in front of him. Shikamaru sighed and took a look around the village. "Menma, if it comes down to it, we can't let them off if they plan to keep doing what they're doing." Menma gave up and shut his eyes. Shikamaru saying it just sealed the deal. Everyone had already told him that, so hearing it from the one person he knew could come up with a better idea just confirmed what everyone else had said. The next time he saw his brother, he would have to face him. If he didn't pay attention to him, he would have to kill him. He looked at Ino and asked, "Do you think you can do it?" Shikamaru also leaned over the edge. "Menma, I have a son. If Ino puts him in danger in any way, I will not think twice. It breaks my heart, but I will do what I have to for my son." Menma scratched the back of his neck. This was already a lot of stress for someone who had just taken office. He was confused as he looked up at the cloudy sky. What was up with all the clouds? Just a few minutes ago, it was all clear. A faint clap of thunder from miles away shook the village as if to warn of something bad. There was going to be a storm. "Ugh, I thought it was going to be clear," Shikamaru said as he looked up at the gray clouds. He said, "Damn, the weather is so crazy these days." "Yeah," said Menma, trying to ignore the feeling that was rising up in the pit of his stomach. Naruto and the others were hiding above the clouds and getting ready to attack the village below. Ino grabbed a kunai and jumped off the bird they were flying over into the forest. Deidara took the clay bird back to the village center and waited for an order. Naruto was slowly saying numbers, as if he were keeping time. The others had already started getting ready for their first attack. Deidara held two of his clay birds in his hands. Pakura made her chakra orbs appear. Zabuza and Kasama drew their swords. The masks on Kakuzu's back fell off and took on their own shapes, and Hidden couldn't wait to jump off the bird and cause trouble. Naruto used hand signs and put out his hand. Above his hand, a Rasengan started to form. It made a high-pitched screaming sound and was surrounded by blades of wind. Then, from the center of the orb, sparks of fire started shooting out, and the color of the orb changed to a very bright white. The others were amazed as he held it over the edge of the clay creature. The wind was whipping around them like crazy. Naruto just kept counting down to 0 in his head. 6, 5, 4, 3. He stopped talking as he held out his hand more. Then he just turned his hand over, and the ball of light that looked like it could kill him fell out of his hand. The rest of them watched it to see what it would do. The chakra ball fell in the busy market area of Konoha, where a few people looked at it in amazement. When it hit the ground, it seemed to disappear into the ground for a moment before a huge explosion that killed everyone in the area. After it went, there was silence for more than a few blocks until the loud sonic boom came right after it. The others were amazed to see how that one jutsu could take out block after block. Before they knew it, they had been seen and were being hit with fireballs. Naruto told everyone to jump away from the clay creature that was falling like a missile. As they were falling toward the village, the group dodged projectiles coming from all directions. It looked like every ninja in the village was attacking at the same time. Pakura sent one of her chakra orbs to the place she could see with the most people. When it hit the ground, it exploded, and the mist that came out of the explosion drained the unfortunate people nearby. With the help of Zabuza, Hidden used his sickle to cut through the attacks. Kasama was taking in everything around him, and Kakuzu was on the back of one of his black masked creatures, which was protecting him from anything that got too close. As they got close to the ground, they grabbed any pole or slid off any building they could to slow their fall. Without a doubt, they spread out to separate the troops. Hidden and Zabuza ran toward the entrance of the village, but two well-known Jonin attacked them. They moved away from each other to avoid the wind-powered kunai that would have stuck one of them. Kakashi Hadake and Asuma Sarutobi rolled to their feet and stood in front of them. Asuma snuffed out his cigarette and said, "No, Kakashi. I guess we'll take these too." As he raised his headband, Kakashi had his eyes on Zabuza. "I guess so," he said, drawing two kunai. Zabuza didn't waste any time running after him. Deidara flew through the air, throwing his clay creatures around, until he had to jump to avoid, surprisingly, another flying piece of art. This one was made by painting. When he turned around, he saw a pale man with a blank face looking at him closely from a bird. As he flew through the sky, throwing more creations out as he went, his smile grew. The pale man had to choose between helping the people or attacking the man. As soon as Pakura touched the ground, a gust of wind pushed him back. She pulled out a kunai while she was in the air to deflect the huge number of weapons that were coming at her. She saw the Kei's sister standing next to a girl with 2 buns in her hair and 2 scrolls in her hands when she landed. Pakura said, "Oh, it's you," as if she didn't feel in the least bit threatened. Temari yelled, "Pakura," and stepped forward with her fan ready. She asked, "Why did you come here?" Pakura didn't answer her question, but instead made 2 more chakra orbs that went around her body. Tenten stepped back so Temari could talk to him. "Don't let them touch you, or you'll die right away." Tenten nodded and jumped further back, thinking that her job was to help since Temari knew about the enemy. Pakura ran forward and tried to avoid the wind-powered blades that were being thrown at her. Kisama was using his shark skin to cut down any shinobi who was stupid enough to try to fight him. At the same time, he was eating the chakra they used to send out their techniques. Just as he was about to kill another man, he jumped back and avoided the kick that broke the wall next to him. When he looked at his next opponent, he tried not to laugh at how silly he looked. He had a stupid bowl cut on top of his head and was wearing a green spandex suit. He pointed his sword at him and said, "Ha, what the hell are you?" Before he got an answer, he jumped back again. When another one came crashing down wearing the same outfit but a few years younger, he had a slight feeling of deja vu. "Guy-sensei, let's fight to win and get better while we're young and in our springtime," he yelled in a silly way. "Watch out, Lee," said a different voice, this one from behind him. When Kisama turned around, a member of the well-known Hyuga clan was there to greet her. "This guy isn't your average opponent," he said as the veins around his eyes started to pop out. "His chakra is unbelievable." Guy called out to him, "Lee," with a serious face. "Be careful. For some reason, I have the feeling that this guy is very dangerous. We will beat him together," he said with a thumbs up and a smile that was too bright. Kisama just stood there and watched the show in confusion before he pulled out his sword. Kakuzu just walked along with his thread balls while they destroyed everything in their way. He didn't have to do much, but he did sometimes go out and kill people. He kept walking until he couldn't move anymore. He forced himself to look down at his feet so he could see that his shadow was a lot longer than it should have been. He went after it until he found a young man who was hunched over and had his fingers in an odd position. A fatter man with swirls on his face, a Hyuga girl, a man on the back of a big dog, and a kid letting bugs out of his body were all standing next to him. Shikamaru sighed and said, "Hey, this was easy, Hinata. Just put him to sleep." She said hi and dropped into a taijutsu stance while turning on her Byakugan. She gasped and looked down when she did. Before she could warn him, a hand shot up from the ground in front of Shikamaru, grabbed his neck, and slammed his face against the floor. Kakuzu took his hand out of the hole in the floor next to him and started walking forward again. As his 5 thread balls with masks shot forward, the shinobi got ready for a fight. After climbing through the window, Ino ran down the hall of the Hokage building to find the person she was looking for. She had already looked in 2 places she thought they might be, but found nothing. This was the last place that came to her mind. Hearing footsteps, she dropped down into a slide and cut the shinobi running the other way between the knees, dropping him instantly. She kept going because she didn't want to put him out of his misery. As she turned another corner, she saw a door at the end of the hallway with a light shining through the bottom. She ran fast and kicked the door open. Inside, there was only one table in a room, but there was no one there when the light was on. Before leaving, Ino let out a frustrated grunt. Before she moved, she heard something in the background, like a thump against metal. She turned around and looked around the room, trying to figure out what it was. She went deeper into the forest and looked in every possible place to hide, but no one was in the room. She was about to leave when she saw something that didn't seem right. She hadn't moved the chair closer to the desk, so it was too far away. It wasn't far enough to just say that someone was in a hurry to leave, it was too far. She took another look under the desk and saw a small tear in the carpet. Almost nobody would have seen it, but she did. She walked over to the tear and pulled on it until a big piece of the carpet seemed to come out without much trouble. It was like a cutout that, when put back in place, perfectly covered the cuts. When he pulled it more, he saw a metal door that was clearly from a bunker. It made Ino smile a little as she looked at it. She opened the door and climbed down through it. She looked around and saw what she thought was the target. The daughter of the Hokage was lying in a carrier. She laughed a little bit and then put her hands up to block the kick that was coming for her head. It was hard enough to kick her over to the side of the bunker, where she rolled away from the punch that was coming at her. At the bunker's exit, where Ino stood, her old friend and rival stood guard over her child. "Who the hell are you?" yelled the girl with pink hair as she pulled out a kunai. Under her mask, Ino smiled and swung her sword around. She laughed as she saw Sakura's bad posture. It was clear that he hadn't trained in a few years. She said, "Sakura Namikaze," slowly as a joke. Sakura lowered herself because she wanted to protect her child. "Hey, honey, why don't you just move over so you don't get hurt?" Sakura changed how she held her kunai when she realized she would have to fight for her son. She couldn't fight like she usually did because the bunker was so small. She would have to defend her daughter to keep her safe. As Naruto walked down the street, he could easily cut through anyone who tried to attack him with his sword. So far, he had killed a large number of Chunin, 3 ANBU agents, and Jonin. He went through the village without fear, killing everyone he saw. He thought Kakashi or Guy, 2 more worthy people, would have at least asked him out by now. They were nowhere to be found. He thought about the time he had spent here and looked around at the new scenery, or at least what was still standing. He didn't know everything when he was young. He blocked the kunai coming at his face with his sword. Behind it was a Uchiha police officer who had turned on his Sharingan. He ran at Naruto while holding another kunai. When facing the legendary Daojutsu, most people would feel a sense of urgency, but Naruto had already fought someone who was known as one of the best users of it. He blocked the cut that was going to hit him in the face and cut slowly toward the man's neck. The man, as expected, leaned back to avoid it. When he did, a copy of Naruto came up from behind him and cut off his head with ease. He stared down at the head of the wide-eyed kid and stabbed both of his opened eyes, knowing full well the kind of vultures that preyed around Konoha. Continuing down the road, he was greeted to 2 more people. Deep in thought, he didn't even realize he had already killed them until he looked up and their blood was gushing out. The liquid sprayed out and covered the side of his mask. Naruto ignored it and continued on. Turning the corner, he was on the main road of Konoha, staring straight down the road at the big red building. Without warning, a kunai flew towards his face, stopping it before it impaled his eye hole. He realized immediately that it wasn't a regular kunai by its 3-pronged shape. With seemingly no reaction, he stuck his hand up, catching the fist of Menma who had suddenly appeared in front of him. Menma was shocked and quickly jumped back. "Hokage," Naruto said, slowly walking towards him. The look Menma gave him told him that he knew who he was. Please don't do this." Naruto stopped a few yards away from him. "You've grown," he remarked casually, ignoring his plea. "Hokage now, huh?" Menma tightened his grip on the kunai in his hand. He looked across at his masked brother with a painful expression. Why are you doing this?" he yelled to him, demanding an answer. Naruto didn't react. Instead, he caught the throat of some random jonin who jumped from an alley next to him. Menma stuck his hand out as if telling him not to. Naruto could see his hand cocking back to throw the kunai. With no mercy or patience, he snapped the man's neck with ease. "No," Menma yelled, throwing the kunai forward. Ino walked around the small metal bunker and stared at the scary-looking woman with pink hair who stood in front of her goal. A small smile was on her lips, but no one could see it. In the time she was given, she would make this fun in so many ways. With a feminine sigh, she rolled her neck and suddenly threw a kunai at her and ran in behind it. Sakura used her own kunai to move it out of the way and then stepped back a little to avoid the sword slash. She had to block the next attack right away before it cut off her head. She was stuck, so she looked into the woman's dark eye holes but saw nothing but darkness. Ino let go of her sword and let it fall over the side of the bunker. She then went straight for a punch to the face. Sakura moved it out of the way and tried to cut at her with her kunai before it hit. Ino brought her knee up and hit Sakura's elbow from the inside, stopping her cut. When she landed, she caught Sakura's counter punch with her fist. Again, Sakura tried to cut, but Ino blocked it with her elbow. Before she could fight back, the person in the mask hit her in the stomach with 3 quick, sharp blows. She sputtered and couldn't avoid the kick that hit the side of her face and knocked her off the bunker. Ino walked over to her and stood over her with an air of power, watching as she tried to get back up. "You're not as strong as they say you are, right?" she asked her in a teasing way. Sakura got back up and threw a few punches, but they were all easily blocked. Ino blocked her last blow and turned her arm. Before she could break it, Sakura flipped over and kicked her in the back, sending her into the wall. Sakura had her pinned down before she could turn around. She felt like she had the upper hand, so she asked, "What do you want?" She pushed the back of her neck with her forearm. Ino could only laugh at her silly attempt to scare him. She moved just enough away from the wall to get under Sakura's grip. She rolled away and gave her knee a sharp kick. Sakura yelped in pain and hobbled back to the carriage to protect Sumire. She started to treat the hurt knee while keeping a close eye on the woman in the mask. Ino stood still and watched her. Again, in a desperate tone, Sakura asked, "Who are you?" Getting into a fight with this woman made her feel very uneasy. She couldn't say what it was. In a way, it felt like she knew the person. The hair made her think of something she wouldn't even dare to think about. Ino laughed, knowing that Sakura had already guessed it was her. She brought her hand up and put it over the mask's mouth. Holding it gently, she slowly pushed up on it, revealing the face Sakura had been hoping to see again someday. Now, no longer. She was shocked and yelled, "Ino! Ino laughed and put her hands on her hips. She had a very strange smile on her face and her eyes were closed. "Hey," she said in a happy voice. Sakura yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" She just didn't get it. Ino answered her as casually as ever. "Well, I'm here to pick up your kid." Sakura's eyes narrowed in a mean way. "Why?" Ino turned her head to the side and smiled at her in a rude way. She nodded and said, "Well, because my honey needs her for a special project." Sakura's face got all scrunched up in surprise. Before she could even ask the question, Ino already knew the answer. "Oh, you don't need to know his name. All you need to know is that he's smart and here to help." Sakura moved back towards Sumire and put her hands up in defense. "No matter who it is, you can't have her." That made Ino raise an eyebrow. She made fun of him by saying, "Oh, come on, billboard brow. You know you're no longer a match, especially not in this tight space. What are you good for besides throwing damaging punches? You really want to risk destroying this bunker and putting your own child in danger?" When she thought about all the words, Sakura's head and guard slowly went down. She hadn't done her training because she wanted to be a mother. Since she hasn't fought in over a year, she has lost a lot of her skill. Now, she couldn't even protect her own daughter well. She put up her guard and, with fire in her eyes, got ready for a fight to the death. Because she was willing to take it that far. Again, Ino saw her getting ready. She thought she couldn't go on like this for much longer, so she put her hands up too. She had to show that she was much stronger than she was before she left. She had been getting a bad deal from this woman for a long time. Sakura got the training at one point, but she messed it up because she wasn't paying attention. Love can make you weak, but it can also make you strong. Ino was getting ready to show her how the latter looked. Sakura ran up to the blonde and threw a wild punch at him. Ino dodged the blow and stabbed her twice below her bicep. Sakura didn't care about the small hits, so she moved her other arm. Ino rolled out of the way and ran at her again. Jumping up, she used her left knee to block her blind right hook and drove her right one through her chin. Sakura fell face first to the ground. Ino stood there until she got back up. When she did, she rushed the blonde again with no hesitation and a fire in her eyes that had to be seen to be believed. By turning around, Naruto was able to avoid the Rasengan that destroyed where he was standing. He landed on the side of a building and crouched down, looking up at Menma, who was shooting at him with anger in his eyes. Naruto waited until he got close to him, then cut the chakra to his feet and fell toward him. Menma came to a stop when he saw Naruto come at him like a bullet. When he leaned back, the red head flew by him. He turned around and jumped off the side of the building to avoid the fireball that destroyed the whole wall. While he was in the air, he saw another one coming toward him. He threw his kunai through the flames and teleported to it. He had to pull his head back before Naruto's knee hit his chin. Because he was standing with his arms outstretched, he couldn't stop the heel from coming down toward his face. It hit him in the face and sent him flying down to the ground, head first. Menma got up off the ground and turned to see Naruto flying toward him. Naruto crashed into the side of Menma's body and kicked him into the shop behind him. Naruto ran over and grabbed a piece of the wall that was falling off the top. He threw it at the blonde Cage, who was trying to pull himself out of the rubble he had been thrown into. Before it hit him in the chest, Menma dodged it and rolled away. Menma pushed Naruto into the table behind him before he could get back on his feet. When he fell and hit his back on the edge, he got back on his feet and flipped Menma over. He kicked the table back to Menma, who had just landed, with a drop kick. When the table fell on him, it briefly pinned him against the wall. Naruto ran up behind them and kicked the table and Menma through the wall, and back onto the street. Naruto jumped out of the way of the kunai that was shot into the shop by a paper bomb. He rolled forward, avoiding the flying debris from behind him. He quickly got back on his feet and hit his back again before Menma's knee hit his face while he was wearing a mask. He kicked himself up and went for the leg sweep that came next. Menma took advantage of the fact that he was in the air and hit him in the side. This made him fall to the ground. Naruto got up from his fall and ran up the side of the building as Menma chased after him. Before he got to the top, he put out his hand and caught the wrist of a shinobi with a sword who was trying to surprise him. He pulled the man down from the roof and then jumped off. While in the air, he kneed him in the face, causing him to release his grip on his sword. Before they hit the ground, Naruto had already decapitated him and kicked the head at the still chasing Menma. Menma dodged the scary object and kept going. His eyes filled with anger. He pulled two of his kunai on the way and threw one at his opponent. Naruto rushed forward and threw his own kunai, stopping it between the two. Before Menma made it to him, he was tripped up by a hand popping out of the ground. He rolled until he was on his back. He quickly pushed his feet up, kicking the wrists of Naruto, who was falling towards him with the sword ready to execute him. He moved his leg back and hit him in the knee, making him fall down. He quickly took away his weapons and put him in a triangle hold by putting his legs around his neck and pulling one of his arms down over his shoulder. He pulled as hard as he could to try to knock him out, but Naruto picked him up and slammed him down so hard that the ground cracked under him. Menma's grip on Naruto got just loose enough for him to get away. When he did, he grabbed him by the collar of his cloak and swung him around until he let go. Then, he threw his limp body into the building behind him. Menma got up slowly and wiped the blood that was coming out of his mouth. Naruto just stood there and looked menacingly at his little brother, who was lying on the ground. Menma got back up and charged again. Naruto waited for him to get close, and when he did, he kicked him hard in the chest to stop his charge. Menma stumbled back in pain for a second, and then someone kneed him in the face, making his nose crack loudly. He didn't have time to get back on his feet, so he flipped away and hit the side of a building, clutching his face in pain. Before he could do anything, another Naruto kicked the wall from the inside, sending him flying. He aimed for the building across the street, but before he could get there, he felt two hands grab his ankles. Naruto started to spin wildly through the air to gain speed. When at the peak of his speed, he released his grip, sending the blonde crashing painfully into the ground. When Menma landed, he flipped over and barrel rolled out the way before Naruto crushed his body as he landed in a crouch. Standing back to his feet, he rushed towards him and pulled two of his kunai. He threw them both on opposite sides of the redhead and made a series of hand gestures. The two blades turned into a lot of them and got stuck in the ground around the redhead. Menma grew agitated at the seemingly undeterred manner of his older brother. Even though he was in a high position, he didn't show him any respect at all. Naruto didn't move at all as he waited for Menma to do something. Menma rolled his shoulder out and stared intently at his brother in a mask, making plans for what he was going to do. He went away after throwing another kunai down next to his own feet. The area around Naruto suddenly lit up with yellow flashes that were meant to blind him. Naruto didn't even react. He was just standing in the middle of the kunai field. As if a practiced routine, he threw his hand up, blocking Menma's right hook with ease. Again, Menma went away, and the blob of flashes kept going. Naruto dodged the kick to the back of his head and waited for Menma to say more. Naruto sighed and turned around. He put out his hand and grabbed his younger brother by the neck as he flashed to the kunai under his feet. He laughed at Otato from behind his mask. He said it in a casual way. It's like you don't even really understand the jutsu. He let go of his neck and let him fall before he flashed away. He said, maybe the yellow flash himself can tell you more. He fell down at the kunai he put away from the redhead, who didn't seem to be looking at him. His father stood a few feet away and looked at Naruto with his eyes. "To-san, get back." Minato looked at him for a moment, then turned back to look at Naruto. Naruto the redhead didn't move as he stared at two of the Hokage. "Why did you do that?" He didn't answer. "What did you want to do?" Naruto gave a snort. He asked in an ominous way, "Do I look like a guy with a plan?" Menma stood up and moved to stand next to his father. The two of them stared over to the other male of their family with steely resolves. "You will not be able to destroy the village," Menma said in a firm voice. "Demolish the village?" Naruto asked in a casual way. "Is that what you believe I was doing?" Menma and Minato sunk into their stances ready for anything. When Naruto looked up, he saw something that caught his attention. "Well, whatever. I'm done here," he said. Then he turned around and started to walk away. Menma jumped in quickly. "Wait, you think we're going to let you go after all this?" he asked incredulously. Naruto kept walking on as if he didn't hear him. "Hey, try and impede my gracious retreat and I can promise more damage will befall the village," he called out over his shoulder. "Take a chance if you want." Before Minato grabbed Menma's elbow, he got his kunai ready. Menma turned to him in question. Minato just shook his head sadly. Menma clenched his teeth and stared at Naruto's retreating form. "We can't beat him here, it would do too much damage. I don't like how easily he gives up. Go check on Sakura." Menma's eyes shot open and he focused his chakra. He couldn't feel her seal, and before he could say anything, Minato made him feel better. "The bunker blocks the Hiraishin's signal so that it can't be found," he said. Menma nodded and took off. Naruto, who was now riding on Deidara's clay bird, didn't want to wait, so he called out to the others as he left. They just jumped on when he and Deidara got low enough for them to do so. Soon, everyone was on board aside from Zabuza, who had Kakashi's Reikiri pierced through his chest. Before telling Deidara to go on, Naruto only gave him a quick glance. "Ha ha," Hidden chuckled, swinging his sickle around. "That was fucking amazing. I killed so many of those rat fuckers." Kisame chuckled. He asked him, "Heh, what's your count?" He had his sword and Zabuza's sword slung over his shoulder. Hidden smiled and said, "Too fucking many." "Where are we going next, oh great leader?" he asked. Naruto stared over the side of the bird, looking through the trees until he spotted Ino. he said in a threatening way. We're going to see an old friend. Sakura was confused as he looked at him. She asked, what? Right now? You don't let us stop to rest, do you? Deidara, Hidden, and Kasama laughed at her as they kept going. Kakuzu didn't seem to care much and Naruto ignored it as well. They swooped down and scooped up Ino before shooting off away from the hidden leaf. By the time they realized the Hokage's daughter was gone, they'd be too far to catch. Menma sat in the chair next to his wife's hospital bed. He looked at her bandaged body and tried to figure out what they should do next. Naruto attacked the village, tried to kill him, and has taken the most important thing in his life. Before, he had in his mind the thought of trying to speak with him and talk him out of whatever it was he was planning. Now, the only thing left was the desire to kill him. He had never thought before that he would want to kill his own brother. He would never have thought about it before. But now he couldn't stop thinking about it. Even his mother had made up her mind, now that their most beloved family member was gone. There was still a heaviness in his heart that was praying for another way, but when his own daughter was at stake, there was no other way. Even though he was sure of his own skills, he knew he couldn't beat Naruto. That was clear from the last battle. Maybe had he used the Kyuubi he could have forced him to fight seriously, but for fear of losing control, he held back to his strongest technique, which he just recently found out was useless against another user. Naruto could have ended him at any time, and it wasn't until the end of the battle did he realize that. It seems like he did it to put him down. It would seem that this endeavor of ending this was not Konoha's own responsibility anymore. In the last 3 days, he got 3 letters from Kumo, Kiri, and Suna, all describing their attack and the theft of their caged loved ones. Menma had no idea what Naruto could be planning, but he felt as though it was falling into place. He might have been trying to start a war. It had everything a task like this would need, but someone as smart as Naruto would know that right away. He might have wanted to do it because the goal was easy to understand. Maybe, but it was too dangerous to guess anything. All he knew was that every living shinobi connected to a village was calling for his head. Well, he didn't know about anyone else except Iwa. A knock broke the silence, and before he could even answer, 2 people marched into the room. Is it true? Asked Mito with a very heated and desperate look in her eyes. Sasuke stood behind her, just as alert. Menma sighed and stood to his feet. He walked towards the window and stared out at the destroyed village. He took Sumair-chan, he said, letting that ring in the air for a few seconds. Mito held her own stomach as she looked down to Sakura, who was still out cold. She couldn't even imagine. Well, what the hell are we gonna do? She asked him urgently. Menma spun around. He said, we're not going to do anything, emphasizing the word we. Why aren't you out there trying to find her? Why haven't you just teleported to her? She asked again, her anger slowly growing. Menma moved his head no. Naruto has tampered with her seal. We can't feel the pull, he said in disappointment. We've tried everything. Mito sat down next to Sakura and grabbed her cold hand. So, we just sit around and do nothing? She asked. What if he kills her? Menma looked at the white blanket and thought about what she had said. He tried to tell himself he wouldn't do that. Menma, Sasuke said for the first time to let people know he was there. Look around you. See how many people he's killed. Are you still trying to defend that monster? No, he didn't know what to say. We'll find her. He got out, staring out the window once again. His eyes were fixed on the far horizon. We will. The sound of very urgent footsteps running down the hall woke all 3 of them up. The door was flung open, and the gate guard rushed through. Hokage-sama, we've received another note. Menma walked over to him. Is it Iwa? He asked. The man looked down at the note and shook his head. Menma took it from his hands and a look of shock and hope lit his face, all tied together with an underlining of worry. What is it? Sasuke asked, walking towards him. Menma turned around and read the message several times before saying what it said. Dear Hokage, it gives me great joy to send you this invitation to an event where you might be able to get back a prize I took from your village. Since it is a prize, you must follow the rules of the game I have set up down to the T. Any ulterior actions will be taken as an immediate forfeit, and your prize is eliminated. It's easy to learn how to play this game. You must meet me at the location marked on the back of this scroll in 3 days. You can only bring yourself, any remaining cage from your village, your strongest jonin, and 1 other person of your choice. Optional, arm yourself for a battle. The rest of the instructions will be given in person among your arrival. I hope you listen to my warning and follow the rules, because I don't have as much patience as I used to. There will be no late entries. If you don't follow the rules, don't show up, or don't work with the other players, you'll lose. Good day, Otaudo. Menma clenched the scroll shut and stared at the ground beneath his feet. What happened? Was he just playing a game? He snapped his fingers, and an ANBU came out of the room's shadows and kneeled in front of him. He said, bring my father and Kakashi, and he meant it. Sasuke gave him a puzzled look. I'm going, he said, as if he were demanding it. Menma shook his head and walked toward the window. No, I need you here. Mito stood up for him and said, Menma, he's the strongest Jonin. Who's stronger than him? Kakashi is, was his quick answer. I am sorry, Sasuke, but you are not match for Naruto. I don't even think I am. Sasuke stepped around Mito and made his way over to the blonde cage. We can take him on together. You know that when we work together, we are stronger. Menma sighed and rubbed his head. Yes, but you have a personal grudge that will cloud your judgment. I can't take you, Sasuke. I need you here with Mito. Here with Mito. I'm going too. She yelled in anger as if him even suggesting she wasn't was some kind of insult. He turned around. Are you crazy? Mito, you're pregnant. You're not going anywhere. I don't have to fight him. I could just talk to him. Menma just stared at her. She didn't yet understand. Mito, he's changed. You can't talk to him anymore. His eyes had a seriousness Mito had never seen before. He took Sumair. So you really want to kill him? She asked. You don't. That's your niece. He yelled back at her. You don't understand yet, because you haven't had your child. He's right, came a new voice. As Minato walked into the room, he had Kushina's hand in his. Mito, I know how you feel, because we all do, Kushina said. She couldn't even look at anyone in the room. Naruto has done the unforgivable. He's attacked our home and taken Sumair. We cannot allow him to do any more damage. Mito looked around at all of them. Everyone else seemed so content with the decision. Then, I'd rather not go anyway, she said, leaning back into Sasuke's chest. I am taking Kakashi and Tusan. Menma said, I don't know what he has in mind, but I'm sure it's not good. What about the special guest? Sasuke asked, piquing Kushina's interest. Menma shook his head. It says it's optional. I don't think it's nieces. I'm going. Kushina interrupted, shocking everyone. Menma looked at her and shook his head as if he was going to say no. Menma, please. Minato felt bad as he looked at her. Kushina, you can't save him. She quickly said, that's not why I want to go. Minato, this is our fault. This is all our fault. And we have to fix it, she said. He didn't answer because he didn't want to argue with her. He very much agreed with her, but he didn't want to let her know it was fine to blame herself. Kasen, Menma said, getting their attention. You wouldn't stand a chance. I'm sorry for saying it, but Naruto is in a class of his own. And by the way she handled Sakura, Ino is far stronger than she was back then as well. I am not weak, Menma, she said in a threatening way. I can handle myself. Menma let out a frustrated sigh and looked at Minato to show him that he would let him make the choice. Minato looked over to Kushina and noticed that look in her eyes. It was a look he hadn't seen in a while. He slowly nodded and faced Menma again. Menma got the message and finally relented. Okay, Kasen, he said, nodding towards her. Just be careful. Kushina nodded her head to show that she agreed, and the fire in her eyes showed how determined she was. A strangely placed earthen platform stuck out of the raging water, a long way from where they had started. Naruto stood at the front of the boat and watched as 5 smaller platforms grew out of the front platform, and a rectangular platform with 2 throne-like seats grew up on the other side. The person who made the thing, a man with orange hair and a strange set of marks on his face. Will that be all, Leader Sama? Naruto stepped forward. Yes, that is fine. Jugo, he said, jumping from the boat and onto the side of the rectangular formation. The other occupants of the boat headed up as well. They walked up to the respective platforms and began writing some kind of seals on the edges of the platform. Naruto and Ino sat on the thrones casually watching the others at work. Ino was holding Sumair in her arms, rocking her to sleep. She looked over to Naruto, who was now reading another book. In reality, her mind was full of worries. With 5 Kage now pining for their heads, she couldn't see Naruto's plan ending with them walking away in victory, and failure in this case meant death. Was this some kind of plan to kill yourself? It made sense when she thought about it. She knew Naruto was not a big fan of life, and he admitted to her that he was not suicidal. Maybe, subliminally, this was some kind of plan to make his death a lot more likely. People with his level of psychosis did this kind of thing often. Hey, babe, she said to him, then turned back to Sumair to look like she didn't care. Naruto looked towards her in question. What are you doing? Naruto just stared at her for a second. Doll face, I told you. It's a surprise. That answer wasn't good enough for Ino. I don't think whatever this is going to work or that will even make it. Naruto turned back to the people working on the seals. Ino, death cannot be a factor when proving a theory such as this. What theory? She asked, finally looking over to him. Naruto dropped his book and looked out in the distance in thought. Well, it is far from pointless. I'll tell you that much. With that answer, he stuck his nose back in the book. Ino got the hint he was finished talking of the matter. She didn't want to push for fear of him thinking she was beginning to question his plan. She returned to playing with Sumire instead. Naruto read a line in the book over and over. His new piece of literature was something he was given from one of his soldiers. It was a book that delved much deeper into the concept of conflict and the theory of chaos and order. The fact that the book didn't have an author was strange. By the way it was written, he'd have thought he had written it himself based on thoughts he had yet to conjure. The wording of the book suggested a much darker understanding of the things in this world we view as precious. It was written in a nihilistic tone, of course, but the words were undisputable. It essentially boiled down to ramblings about the classic tale of the benevolent king and the revolting band of misfits. What was different was that it wasn't clear who the main character was. Unlike most books, the line of good and evil was so diluted it was almost non-existent, leaving the decision of who to follow up to the reader. Strangely, however, the antagonist was clear, but there was no protagonist. For Naruto, it brought forth the realization that there was no impartiality between making either connection. A crowd was quick to point out an individual as evil when their ideals didn't exactly match up. Yet, when it came to picking a hero, no one could decide. It brought him to the realization that this entire scenario directly displayed that. He was the clear antagonist. No matter what his reasons were, he was an evil person who made the world a worse place. Even for the people who followed him, he wasn't a hero. He was just someone who was willing to tip the scale that kept peace and chaos in balance, and that was what they wanted. In truth, they were all vultures that he refused to empathize with. They had their own grudges and dislikes against this world, but they were too afraid to stand out and strike first. The heroes were, of course, the Cage, who were so good at leading their people in prayer that they were treated like gods. It sickened him in a way to see a man bow at another man's feet so willingly. It was awful for a lot of reasons. He couldn't grasp the concept of it, even though he himself had done the same thing for most of his adolescence. Not a hierarchy of power, but a hierarchy of fearlessness, the book said about it. In other words, a man will bow to a man who fears less than him, or appears to. A man who is willing to draw the attention of death and not care. These Cage were ruling as false kings, yet they didn't know the meaning of such a position and how rotten it truly was. Especially Menma, and it irked him so. Even his own family was getting caught up in this vicious cycle. He refused to stand for it. As he stood up, he saw that all of the seal users had finished their jobs and were talking to each other while waiting for his orders in the middle of the battle platform. As soon as people saw him move, they stopped talking. Naruto stood at the edge of the long, rectangular platform and looked at what they were doing from a distance. Very good job. You are all free to take your leave. All of the men nodded and jumped back down to where their boats were waiting. Naruto jumped down to the arena platform and inspected the seal personally, changing things as he saw fit. When he was done, he jumped to the other 5 platforms and did the same thing on each one. By the time he had finished, the day was coming to an end. He jumped back up to the throne pillar and retook his place next to Ino, who had her body slung out across the armrests of her throne, feeding Sumire through a baby bottle. "Everything good?" she asked him, kicking her shoes off and resting her feet on Naruto's armrest as he sat down. Naruto agreed and let out a sigh. "Yes, let's wait." Ino looked up and smiled. "Not for long. It looks like our cargo is here." Naruto traced her eyes and looked up to see Deidara's clay dragon coming toward them, carrying the bound and gagged forms of each of the prizes. Naruto stood up and told Deidara where to put the stones. He had them all spaced out evenly along the rectangular platform in front of their thrones. They were all chained to the ground and stood with their backs to the arena platform. Well, all but the one who was too young to even walk. They were lined up based on their village. To Naruto's far left was the son of the Raikage, with a chain around his neck connected to the ground. The Tsuchikage's childhood friend was in the next slot. The third slot, which was directly in front of Ino and him, was left blank. The Kazekage's nephew slept in his crib in the 4th slot. The final slot had the Mizukage's fiancée slouched over on her knees with rope tightly securing her arms behind her back. Naruto went to each slot and went through the hand signs one by one. He slammed his hands down on the ground behind them, which briefly lit up their area before he moved on to the next one. When he finished all of that, he retook his seat and sat with Ino, waiting for the fruition of this confusing plan to play out. A play he wasn't afraid to admit was a borrowed experiment. So, they had to wait. The next day, Menma, Kushina, Minato, and Kakashi used the coordinates on the back of their scroll to guide them through the water. The Jonin with silver hair drove their boat. Everyone was fully armed and prepared for war. That's what it felt like at that moment. Like they were heading into war. Every time a wave hit the side of their boat, it felt like a distant heartbeat that got faster as the tension in the air got higher. Nobody was talking, which increased the eeriness of the situation. Menma sat on the edge of the boat and looked out into the murky water. Fear gripped his heart, and his thoughts were all over the place. What if this was some kind of trap? He was sure it wasn't because of how honest Naruto seemed, even when he thought about what he had done. It would be a great time for a surprise attack, which is exactly what he was planning. He was really trying to clear his head so that his judgment wasn't clouded during the battle. He was the only one on the boat who had never been to war. The other three had. Everyone else seemed so calm or at the least composed about the situation. It made sense considering their history with events of this magnitude. But a piece of him wanted to argue that they just truly didn't understand the threat that was his brother. He himself had no idea how monstrously strong Naruto was until their last battle. Naruto would have killed him if his father hadn't come when he did. They still didn't understand how strong he was. They were sure of their own skills because they had done so well in the past. But this was something else, something much more controlling than he was willing to admit. During their fight, he came to understand this. Naruto did much more than just handle him. He did it with ease. It had been years since he had felt so small. When he could finally match his father in a battle, a man who was marked as a flea on sight shinobi in the bingo books, he figured he was on par with anyone he came up against. Well, this was a very different level altogether. Finally, his eyes caught sight of a set of rock formations with boats surrounding the bottom. They seemed to be the last ones to arrive, which was odd since the sun hadn't even come up yet. They tried to figure out how high it was by looking up, but they couldn't see past the fog. They pulled up next to the smaller pillar that held the symbol of Konoha on its side. The four of them nodded to each other and jumped up to the side of the platform and began running up. When they finally got to the top, it was too late for them to hear what the others were saying, and a wall went up around them. When they looked around, they saw that the other cage and their guests were all fighting. The arena platform right in front of them was empty, and the platform with the prizes was farther away. Minato, Kushina, and Kakashi all looked at Naruto, who was still reading his book and didn't seem to notice them at all. Menma stared at the blonde who was holding his daughter in her arms. Hokage, yelled a feminine voice off to their far right. Nice of you to finally show up. Menma finally took his eyes off of his daughter and looked at the platform next to them where the Tsuchikage was standing. The Tsuchikage was the one who had spoken to him. Tsuchikage-sama, he said, and gave a slight nod. On the other side of her, a dry, lazy voice said, maybe now we'll start this nonsense. Menma looked past her and gave a small nod to the Reikage, Darui. He then turned around and said hello to Gaara, who was the Kazekage to his right, and Chijiro, who was the Mizukage at the end. So, any idea what we're in for? He asked them all. No, the piece of shit hasn't said a word since we got here, yelled the Tsuchikage looking up to the higher platform. As soon as I'm free, I'm going to kill him. Then I guess this is just a race to see who can get to him first. The monotonous voice of the Kazekage replied. Menma could only look up at Naruto and wonder what he was going to do. He had everyone there and everything seemed to be ready, so what was he waiting for? He yelled up, hey, because he thought he just hadn't seen them yet. Chijiro told him, don't waste your breath. He won't answer. Minato stepped up next to him. Tusan, he told him, I can't feel her pull. I know, replied the blonde man. Neither can I even from so close. He must be messing with it in some way. He looked at the seal's unique green glow and asked, what do you think of it? Minato could only shake his head. He ran his finger over it and commented on how solid it felt. I haven't seen anything like it in a long time, he said. There's nothing you can do about it, right? He asked with hope. Minato didn't seem too sure about it. I don't think I can risk it. If I knew Naruto, I wouldn't be able to change the writing on it, which isn't even visible. We should have put Kanai on the boat, Menma agreed. He told Minato, make sure Kasan is okay, and Minato nodded and walked back to Kushina. Next, Kakashi walked up, and he looked more tense than he ever had before. So what's the plan? He asked him lowly, not wanting to be heard by the others. We just wait. Menma gave a shoulder shrug. It looks like we don't have a choice, Kakashi said. Then he nodded and went quiet. The groups of shinobi were quiet for the next 20 to 30 minutes as they waited for something to happen. Ino was trying to make Sumair laugh by playing with her. She looked at Naruto and wondered what was taking him so long. When he finally looked up from his book and out to sea, she knew what to do. She chuckled. She asked, is it so important to wait for the sun? Naruto just gave him a shrug and kept looking at his book. Give them time to make plans, he said with a smile. Ino nodded, and she and Sumair went back to playing. Naruto kept reading his book, occasionally looking over to the horizon to see if there was any sign of light. Soon, the prizes started to wake up, which got the attention of their own parties. Naruto was interested in everything they did and said, For a few minutes, they looked at each other and whispered words of comfort. When the time was right, the cage also talked about how they could get rid of him. It was funny to see how quickly they seemed to join forces, and it proved the saying the enemy of my enemy is my friend. People who thought they were the main character had such a hard time staying friends. It wouldn't last as long as he would have liked. When she looked back up at the horizon, there was a tiny bit of light. He smiled behind his mask and closed his book with a snap. Everyone turned their attention to him as he stood to his feet. He started to pace behind the incentives, which was a scary way to get their attention. He hadn't said anything yet, but he walked as if this was the first step. He finally stopped in the middle section, which had been set aside for his niece, and looked out at the cage in their groups. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad you're here, which means you agree with the rules of my game. With that out of the way, let's have some fun. The Tsuchikage yelled from her pillar, "Hey, you psycho. Are you going to tell us why we're here or not?" Naruto just looked at her and didn't say anything. Her group consisted of only herself and her selected jonin, a chubby man Naruto recognized from the bingo book as Akatsuchi. From what he knew about the hot-tempered cage, she was rude, crude, and very moody, so he didn't pay attention to what she said. Ino, on the other hand, didn't like that she was insulting her man. "UBTCH, don't fucking talk to him like that," she yelled at her. Naruto just put up his hand, stopping her string of curse words. She let out a huff of relief and went back to playing with Sumair, all the while silently spitting out poisonous words. Naruto took a step back and walked toward the second prize slot, where Makatsuchi was chained. In desperation, her eyes were piercing her friends with tears in them. "I think you're here to get your prize," Naruto said, drawing Cage's attention even though he looked much more calm. But Tsuchikage was staring at Naruto with eyes full of tears and a look that meant death. "You're fucking right, and if you touch her, I swear I'll fucking kill you," she growled, not in the least trying to scare him. Naruto agreed with what was said and took a step back to the middle of the platform. He walked to the edge of the cliff and sat down with his feet hanging over the edge. "I promise none of them have been hurt. They are just incentives for you to take part," he said. All of the cage were upset by what was done. The way he treated the whole situation made them angry. The Raikage finally spoke up because he was tired of waiting. "The letter said that when we got there, we would get more information," he said, as if Naruto had forgotten or something. Naruto looked over to him and examined his party. Killer Bee was a man he thought was the most powerful jonin in their village. Then, the blonde woman he knew to be the boy's mother. But the last Raikage wasn't there, which Naruto thought was strange. He didn't know he had died. "Yes, and you will be Raikage in time. But first, I'd like to tell you why I'm doing this," he said to a roar of angry objections. Naruto just waited for them to stop making noise. The Tsuchikage yelled, "No fucking way," as she took a threatening step forward that turned out to be useless. "I'm here for Makatsuchi, not to hear about your crazy plan," he said. "We don't want to play your games, Chuckles. I want my son back," yelled a man behind the Kazekage who was wearing a strange black suit and face paint. He was the only person he had with him. "So do I," replied the Raikage in a smooth voice. "We'd much rather start whatever trial you've set up," he told his son, who was looking at his mother and trying to calm him down. Naruto didn't react to any of their complaints. He turned his head to the right and stared at the blue-haired Cage, who was looking at his wife. His group included another man with blue hair and an eye patch, as well as a bald man who carried two wide swords on his back. "How are you doing, Mizukage? Do you have any complaints?" he asked for no apparent reason. The Mizukage looked at him with disdain and clenched his teeth. He said, "Let's just get this over with." Naruto went back to the middle and looked across at the one group that had been quiet the whole time. The group with his mother, 3 shinobi at the cage level, and the most people in it. He didn't speak directly to them, but he did talk in their direction. "Maybe my instructions weren't as clear as I thought," he said as he pulled 4 kunai out of thin air. He skillfully threw them into the air, and each one landed next to one of the prizes with a paper bomb attached to its loop. The group of Cage kept quiet because they were all afraid of what they would say next. "If you do what I say when I say it, you get your prize. If you don't, your prize goes away. It's that simple." He let that statement hang in the air for a few seconds while he watched how people responded. As expected, they were all staring at him with the intention to kill. Naruto wasn't scared at all, and he didn't have to try hard to look at them. "Now, let's get started," he said as if nothing had happened. "I don't like you," he said. Everyone looked at each other, and that was clear. He said, "I don't like you. I don't like what you stand for, and I hate the people who follow you, even though it's not their fault." The Kazekage summed up what he was saying by saying, "You clearly hate the shinobi villages." Naruto gave a sigh. "In a way, my hatred, as you put it, covers a much wider range," he replied. I hate hypocrisy, and you people have it in large amounts. So, the Tsuchikage asked incredulously, you hate that we're hypocrites. That's why you're doing that. Naruto gave a head shake. No, that's not why the test is today, he said with a joke while rubbing his shoulder for some reason. Before we start, you all need to know what I'm suggesting and why I'm suggesting it, he said. The Mizukage asked in a threatening way, so this is like a game to you. Naruto turned his head toward him. He said it as if it was obvious. Well, of course it is. That's why you all have prizes. Now, to help you understand better, I'll tell you what role you play in society. What you do is bad, but you don't know it. Menma spoke up for the first time. He asked, what are you talking about? Naruto was looking at him. He said, patience, Hokage. We have all day, which sounded bad. You're all in charge of keeping the peace in your own villages, which is what every wide-eyed child wants to do. But what you're doing is far from righteous. Okay, hold on, the Tsuchikage said with an arrogant smile. She said, I already figured it out. Naruto just stood there and looked at her, waiting for her to say something stupid. They were ridiculous. You were one of those wide-eyed children who wanted to be a cage. When you didn't get it, you were forced into a life of hatred and self-loathing that made you hate the position and the system of the village as a whole. Now, you've come up with this crazy plan to show everyone who's wronged you how stupid they were for not giving you the position. She finished with her arms crossed and a smug look on her face. Everyone in the room went back to silence, thinking about the possibility that she might be right. All of them were caught off guard by Ino's sudden, uncontrolled laughter. She laughed out loud at the ridiculous statement. They couldn't see it, but they could feel the smirk on the masked man's face, and his shoulders moved slightly, which showed that he was laughing to himself. Everyone's attention was drawn to the blonde who was crying from laughing so hard that she couldn't stop. She laughed so hard that she yelled, ha ha ha, you dumb bitch, ha ha. The Tsuchikage was starting to feel embarrassed for no real reason about how disrespectful they were being toward her knowledge. Based on what he said, it was a reasonable assumption. Shut up. She couldn't even find the words to insult the blonde woman, who just ignored her and laughed until her stomach hurt. Naruto finally seemed to calm down, and he raised his hand for Ino to do the same. Her never-ending laughter stopped slowly but surely. Interesting theory. Not right, but interesting, he said with a hint of amusement. No, Tsuchikage. To be honest, I've never really cared about being a cage until recently, he said. Minato finally spoke up and asked, what started it? Naruto looked at him for a short while. He took a book out of his pouch and said, literature, believe it or not. This answer surprised everyone. Kakashi asked the question that everyone was thinking. You mean a book told you to do all of this? Naruto just shrugged. Not necessarily. This book just untied me and let me out of my cave, he said in a mysterious way. TCH, figures he'd live in a cave, the Tsuchikage said under her breath. Naruto didn't care about what was said and kept going. He said, in a figurative sense. He said, I think you need to hear this story to understand how it relates to you. There was a man who was chained to the back of a cave, facing away from the entrance. He was born in the cave and had never seen anything but the shadows cast by the creatures and people who passed by. His only companion was the shadow of a man who would stop and talk to him every day, and tell him about the things he was protecting him from. The Mizukage spoke up for everyone and said, I don't see how this has anything to do with us. This just seems like a story. Naruto kept going. The Shadow Man convinced the prisoner that he was doing the right thing by keeping him in there. Years later, when he was finally set free, he stayed in his position, too afraid to leave the safety of his cave for fear of the creatures lurking outside, not knowing that they were just people. It was the Mizukage who answered. You're wrong, he said. If what you are saying is true, then what are we protecting them from? Monsters like you, he asked. Under his mask, Naruto smiled. Oh, I'm not a monster. I'm just ahead of the curve. Wink. Naruto tilted his head in amusement. Chaos Mizukage, he said. You people are protecting them from the joys and peace of chaos. You let that statement hang in the air. You try to keep things in order because your ancestors taught you that chaos is bad. In this theory, it seems strange that you are both the victims and the oppressors. It is bad, Minato said, speaking up again. Since you like explaining things so much, let me teach you something, he said. Naruto nodded and waved for him to go on. If you think of war as chaos, you really don't know what you're talking about. War is a time when you have to do whatever you have to do to protect your home. It's bad. For a few seconds, Naruto didn't say anything. He just looked at the blonde man to see how serious he was. War, he started, is just the result of a fight for order. It's a man-made disaster that we shouldn't blame on anything but ourselves, he said, angering the older attendants who had seen it before. Is it really that bad to be able to let loose and become the killers we were meant to be? He asked, making fun of how much they hated the subject. We weren't made to kill, said the Kazekage, who was a little annoyed by what had been said. No one is born with the ability to kill. Naruto groaned. Huh, you're wrong again, he said, rolling his neck out as if talking to them was just too much work. We were all meant to be killers, and I don't just mean shinobi. I mean all of humanity. That's why we were all given the ability to kill. Think about it this way. A kunai was made to kill, and it does it well. He nodded firmly, as if he knew that all too well. It wasn't made to be toilet paper, so it can't work as such. Humans were made to kill. It's how we survive in this world, why we have such intelligence to improve our tactics, and why war was invented. That sounds like something a fucking psycho would do, said the Tsuchikage. Naruto just shrugged. If that's how you see it. But, by that logic, every shinobi who has ever killed an enemy without remorse is just as crazy as you say. In this world of ours, there is no innocent power. Strength for us is based on our ability to take the life of another, and yet you all have the nerve to stand here and say we weren't made for such a thing. If you weren't also crazy, I'd think you were insane. The only guest at the Tsuchikage, who had been quiet until now, finally lost his temper. He yelled in anger, "Shut your mouth. You don't know what it's like." Since he was an older man, it was likely that he was alive during the last war. Naruto watched him. "Oh, I know what you're going through. Believe me, I get it," he said. Minato said with a knowing tone. "No, you don't." Naruto turned and looked at him. "No, I know for sure you don't," he said, slightly raising his voice to make his point clear. Behind his mask, Naruto smiled. Is war not just a struggle between two sides to gain the upper hand, using every underhanded tactic imaginable? Minato remained quiet. That was a pretty fair description. War is much more than bloodshed and death. If that's what you thought it was, I can assure you that I've seen that too, and in a much worse way than you. Minato moved his head. No, you just don't get it. Naruto laughed. So, Yandame, what does war mean to you? Minato froze, noticing the stares he was receiving from the other older members of the villages. Everyone there knew that he was a terror during the last war, but seeing it for yourself was a different thing. War is complete and utter hell, in every sense of the word. To be able to function in a world with so much chaos, you have to kill off parts of yourself that make you human. Before he could go on, he heard the person he was talking to scoff. Naruto saw that Minato was hesitant. "I'm sorry," he said in a shy way. "I just thought it was crazy that you thought war was real chaos." How did he put it? Minato said, "Most people would say that's the best way to understand the word." Everyone saw the blonde woman get up from her seat and put the child she was holding into a carrier. She then put the child on the middle of the platform behind Naruto. Naruto just shrugged. He replied, "Then most people would be wrong." He said to Ino as she sat down next to him, "War is more barbaric than organized chaos. It's made up of groups of soldiers who fight to prove themselves. You see, real chaos isn't important to me at all. Almost it's like it doesn't exist." At this statement, everyone looked at him strangely. He seemed to be in favor of chaos the whole time, and now he was saying it didn't even exist. "I know it's strange," he said, putting their minds at ease. "Chaos is described as something that no one could ever understand, as total disorder and confusion. The problem is that when you think of this, you all picture the same thing," he said, playing with the kunai. "You imagine a world with no rules, where people kill anyone and everyone for their own reasons or for no reason at all. Yeah, is that what you're trying to do to the world?" asked the Tsuchikage. "Couldn't hurt," he replied. "The reason I do not believe chaos exists is because to me, there is no confusion. You all would view a world such as that as some kind of hellish struggle of life and death, but there is much more to it than that." Every word he said was accented by the wind that was beginning to kick up and the apparent brewing storm. "When you see chaos, I see freedom. When you see crime, I see fairness. Just because you look at the world differently doesn't make it a better place if it's like what you're saying," the Kazekage said in his usual monotone voice. "You are just blinding yourself from the horror of the crimes being committed." Naruto quipped up. He snapped his fingers and pointed in his direction. "There goes that famed hypocrisy," he replied with amusement. "You say this, Kazekage, but you put your people in the same situation without their permission. In the world I describe, they would be free to choose which side to look at. What of the people that would view it the way you claim we would?" the Mizukage asked. "The people who would view it as a hell and search for a better life." Naruto continued playing with his kunai. "You make a good point, Mizukage, but chaos is different from its partner in some way," he said. "They share a lot of the same qualities and possess radical differences, but one thing that sticks out to me the most is that chaos is fair." Wink. "And you believe order is not?" the Raikage asked from his spot. Naruto looked over to him. "Well, of course not. You are proof of that, Raikage," he said, giving him a strange look. "In fact, most of you are," he clarified. You all have this false belief that with a little hard work anyone with a strong enough will could climb their way up the ranks and make it to a position such as yours, yet you all neglect to see that your lives have all led you to your positions. You all held some sort of connection to your previous cage, whether it be student, child, grandchild, or just simply a blatant favorite in the case of you Mizukage. My position was earned fairly, said the Raikage, receiving shouts of agreement from the other four. Naruto nodded. He replied, "Oh, I'm sure. I am sure every other child your age had the privilege of training under the Sandame Raikage, or the Sandame Tsuchikage, or the Yandame Hokage. Point is, regardless of what you may believe, your position was achieved with the advantage of tutelage under a powerful shinobi. Most of the other children of your villages were probably pawned off on some ordinary jonin who was at the least barely capable of teaching them the basics." Minato said, "In the past, there have been shinobi who rose to power without being taught by anyone. You would know about that, right?" This implied that Naruto was one of these people. Naruto said, "Actually, I wouldn't. If you think I got where I am on my own, you are wrong. Just because no one held my hand and showed me the way doesn't mean they didn't teach me." "Okay, hold on." But Tsuchikage said, "What the fuck is it with you two?" She asked, looking at Minato. "You've been sitting here talking to him like you know him or something. Who the fuck is he? He's from Konoha, isn't he?" she yelled. Minato ignored her. "If that's what this is about, please, you don't have to do all of this. Just take your revenge and be done with it." Naruto just looked at him blankly. He stood up and threw the kunai over his shoulder. "You give yourself too much credit, Yandame," he said. It landed right next to Sumire's carrier, which was a ring with a paper bomb on it. "I'm not mad at you or your wife. My goal is more interesting than taking small revenge, and this isn't that kind of story. We gonna start hun." Ino quipped, hopping to her feet as well. She put her arm through Naruto's and walked behind him as they went back to their thrones. Yes, we are." When they sat down, Naruto surveyed the group of shinobi. "Okay, let's see. Why don't you pick Dollface?" Ino sat up happily. "Oh, okay. I pick Hiwa Suna," she said happily. Naruto nodded and thought about what she had chosen. "Very well," he said. He made hand signs, and the Kazekage and Iwa's only jonin appeared in the arena in a flash that Menma and Minato had seen before. But Tsuchikage ran forward and put her hands on the barrier. Hey, what the hell are you doing? He's no match for a cage," she yelled. Akatsuchi, the Kazekage, was looking at the guy in question. It looked like a big, round man with a big nose. He then turned and looked up to the masked man. "What is the purpose of this?" Naruto gave a sigh. "I just want to see what happens," he replied portentously. "Don't wait on me. Start whenever you wish." Nobody moved a muscle. "I have no quarrel with this man," the Kazekage said with his arms crossed. He didn't want to fight someone who hadn't hurt him. "Of course you do," Naruto said. "This man here is keeping you from retrieving your prize," he said, pointing over to the Kazecage's nephew. Everyone grew alarmed seeing that the explosive tag was burning. "Wait," the Kazekage yelled, raising his hand up to him. He yelled, "Wait, I'll fight," to try to get the man to stop burning the seal. Naruto gave a sigh. He said it in a casual way. "Oh, I'm sure you will. That seal is a slow-burning tag that will blow in 2 minutes if I don't stop it. Unfortunately, I won't stop it as long as this man is still breathing," he said. Everyone was horrified by what he meant. The Kazecage's eyes were burning with rage. He was trying to weigh what would be the right thing to do. From the deathly stare he was getting from the Tsuchikage, he just knew there would be hell to pay for this. "Gaara," yelled Kenkiro. "Gaara, please." He looked across at the man who now held a shaky kunai in his hand. He looked back up to Kenkiro and then over to the worried look on the Tsuchikage's face. "Wow, a minute wasted," Naruto said, staring at the half-burned tag. Gaara looked back over to his begrudging opponent and the sand from his gourd busted out of the top. "I'm sorry," he said in a low voice as he sent wave after wave of sand toward the man, who tried his best to stay out of the way. Losing his footing, he fell to his back and was engulfed completely. Gaara tried hard to kill the man, but for some reason he couldn't crush him. Suddenly a hand of stone burst from the sand. 30 seconds Kazekage, Naruto said. Gaara clenched his teeth and closed his eyes. Suddenly, his sand took on a much more demonic look with cracks covering its surface. His right eye turned black and the iris turned golden. With the help of the Shukaku, he was finally able to crush the man with ease. "No," yelled the Tsuchikage, beating the barrier with all she had. "Fuck," she bellowed out as she dropped to the ground. Gaara felt remorse for his action, but relief seeing that the tag stopped its burning. A flash of light blinded him and he was back next to Kenkiro. Everyone remained silent, staring at the mutilated body of the Iwa shinobi. Naruto eyed the Tsuchikage whose eyes were on the ground beneath her. He was waiting for the outburst, and sure enough he received it. She used all of her strength to hit the barrier. She yelled, "Let me out of here or I'll fucking kill you." She yelled, "I swear on everything, I will fucking kill you." No one knew if she meant Naruto or the Keisuke. Naruto didn't care about her useless threats, so he just brushed them off. In the arena, a hand reached up from the ground and pulled Akatsuchi's body down. "Well, revenge seems to be on your mind," he said, going through hand signs. But Tsuchikage appeared in the arena, staring over to her opponent. "Shit," Kankuro whispered softly to himself. "No," the Keisuke yelled, seeing the danger. "Wait." Naruto just stared out, wondering what the Tsuchikage would do. Her angry eyes looked right into the worried eyes of the Keisuke. She suddenly asked, "When can I start?" Naruto gave a sigh. He told her, "This is on you. If you don't want to do it, you can go back to your barrier." Kankuro released the breath he didn't know he was holding. His heart skipped a beat when a rock spear popped out of the ground and nearly punctured his chest. He jumped back in time to get away from it. He yelled at her, "Hey, what the hell?" and pulled his favorite puppet from behind his back. The Tsuchikage went through hand signs and spit out some kind of strange lime concoction that covered Kankuro's prized puppet. The slime also covered his feet, holding him in place. He shouted, "Hey, wait," and put his hands up. "Tsuchikage, please," the Keisuke yelled out, begging for his brother's life. "He has a family. Please don't." The Tsuchikage stared at Kankuro's trembling body intently. Slowly, a rock spike rose up from the ground next to her, and she snapped it off. So did Akatsuchi. With no mercy, she threw the spike forward, impaling the helpless man. It went right through his head and broke his skull in half. Silence rang through the area, with everyone's eyes on either the dead body or the ghastly look on the Keisuke's face. "Let me out," the Keisuke said lowly, trying to draw on the powers of Shukaku. Naruto did nothing but look at him. He knew at this point that they hated each other very much. It was an inevitability. "I said, let me out," he repeated with a disgusted look on his face. He looked back at the Tsuchikage and said, "In time, Keisuke. The Tsuchikage hasn't truly played yet," he said, going through hand signs. In a flash of light, Kakashi appeared in the arena. Hey. No, Menma yelled out until Minato put his hand on his shoulder. He told Menma he'll be fine. Naruto looked at Kakashi and knew what was going to happen. "Now," he said, looking towards the Tsuchikage, "your revenge is out of the way. You fight for the survival of your prize." A muffled cry of desperation left the gauged mouth of Makatsuchi, seeing her tag lit aflame. "Your time begins, Kuretsuchi," he said, using her real name. Without hesitation, she chunked spikes of rocks at the Sharingan wielder. Kakashi jumped to the side, kicking off the barrier to avoid the next barrage. When he landed, he leaned back, avoiding the next strike. Quickly, he jumped up, dodging the slime she used against Kankuro. Figuring the only way to survive was to fight back, he rushed her with a kunai in hand. Kuretsuchi pulled one of her own and clashed with him. She began slashing at him like a woman possessed, and Kakashi was able to avoid all of them thanks to his Sharingan. Feeling desperate, she yelled out in anger. "Arg!" Kakashi knocked her off balance and kicked her away. He got between the two spikes that she threw at him. Immediately, he had to dodge another that shot out of the ground. Going through hand signs, he slammed his hands on the ground and a wall of mud shot up in front of him, blocking the slime. Before the spike sticking out of the wall could pierce his neck, he jumped away. Losing his footing, he rolled back and scrambled away from the airborne cage coming down on him with another spike in her hand. To the horror of the people of Konoha, she put it right through his chest. Naruto chuckled, seeing the clone burst into a cloud of smoke and the real Kakashi pop out of the ground, delivering a roundhouse kick to the Tsuchikage's face, sending her into the side of the barrier. Naruto told the angry woman, 1 minute. She growled again and went through hand signs. Puffing her chest full, she spit out big balls of lava that Kakashi had difficulty dodging. Jumping up, he was caught vulnerable in mid-air. She spit a ball of lava at his unprotected form. Thinking quickly, Kakashi packed his left eye with chakra and opened it, displaying his Mangekyo Sharingan. The ball of liquid fire was pulled through a hole in the air. When he hit the ground, he covered his eye and almost fell over from the backlash of using the technique. He had to quickly roll forward to avoid the spikes coming out of the ground. He was cut alongside the back of his calf in his escape, inciting a yelp of pain. 10 seconds, Naruto said, upping the adrenaline factor once more. The Tsuchikage's panicked look stared up into the eyes of her best friend in desperation. Like a child begging for something, she squealed out a hollow, "Please." That was either directed at Naruto or Kakashi. She threw everything she had at the silver-haired man, who dodged each attack as best he could. He was just too hard to hit in the time limit of 2 minutes. 5, 4, 3, 2. The kunai next to Makatsuchi went off with a loud explosion. A barrier shot up around her space, protecting the others on the ridge, but they all felt the violent tremor, none more so than Kuretsuchi, who froze in horror and stared at the smoked-out barrier that slowly cleared, revealing nothing but bits of what used to be her friend. Her face contorted into a look of true and undeniable pain. She hit her knees and covered her mouth to hide the silent scream that was stuck in the back of her mouth. "Arg!" she yelled out in sorrow. "Maka!" She hit the ground beneath her, and the surrounding viewers could feel her sadness from a distance. Kakashi more than anyone else, because he was sitting back and trying to catch his breath. "It would seem that your prize has been eliminated. That means you have lost. If you so wish, you are free to go," he said, preparing to send her back to the platform her barrier once stood. She shook her head, causing him to stop to see what it was she would do. With tears still streaming down her eyes, she looked over to Kakashi with nothing but pure hatred. "Hey, no wait," yelled Menma, being somewhat mimicked by Minato and Kushina, seeing that she was going to kill him. Kakashi moved back, and when she attacked him again, she did more damage to his leg than just the cut on his calf. He grit his teeth seeing her charge towards him. At this point, he was completely helpless. He put too much chakra into that Mangekyo technique, and now he was left helpless. Naruto watched on in interest. In her rage-filled sprint towards the man that refused to die to save her friend, she pulled a spike from the ground. All she saw was red at this moment. In the span of an hour, she lost 2 of her closest people. She had long been sent over the edge, and she just had to kill someone. She needed to. Bringing her hand down on the silver-haired Jonin with a war cry, she was surprised when her wrist was caught by an unexpected man. All of this was done by the person in the mask. Was he here? When she looked back up to his throne, he wasn't there, so she knew this was the real one. "I cannot allow you to kill a participant. You have failed your task, so I give you 2 options. Either leave or die." She clenched her teeth so hard that they hurt. Seeing this as her chance, she drew a kunai from her pouch and swiped at him. In other words, she had just agreed to die. Naruto hit her in the throat before her arm even came in range. Then, with absolutely no mercy, he kicked her back, impaling her on a spike that she herself had made. Kuretsuchi gasped at the rock sticking out of her chest, and she brought a shaking hand up to grab at it. She could feel her body slowly descending further down the earthen spike, and every second of it hurt. Naruto walked up to her and grabbed her by her hair. "You've done well, Tsuchikage. Your people would be proud," he said. "Well, what's left of them?" With that said, he snapped her neck with no mercy. Now, the others finally witnessed what it was they were dealing with. This man just defeated a Kage with such ease. Some of them just wrote it off as her being too emotionally distraught to fight properly, but Menma knew. He knew even more than before. Kakashi as well, but as for Minato, who knew what was going through his mind. "I apologize for this minor hiccup," Naruto said, turning around to Kakashi, going through his hand signs. Kakashi showed up with the others in the barrier. It was of course expected, as human emotions are a delicate thing. He went through hand signs again, and the area inside of the barrier returned to normal as if no battle had even taken place. "Now that that hiccup is over with, let's move on," he said as he jumped back up to his seat. "Hokage," Darui called out, eyeing Naruto suspiciously. "You can't deny it any longer. You know this man." Menma looked at him with worry, but it was bound to happen. He didn't want to talk about it. Thankfully, or unluckily, he didn't have to. A voice that hadn't been heard yet said, "I know who this is." One of the members of the Mizuki's group stepped forward. He was a much older man with blue hair and an eye patch. Years ago, during the rise of Konoha's popularity due to the growing fame of Itachi Uchiha, there was another name that arose throughout the nation as well. The Second Flash. His statement hung in the air, and everyone had their gazes split between the 2 Hokage and their masked oppressor. "Is that you?" Under his mask, Naruto laughed. He shrugged and said, I'm a little flattered. I didn't think that little title was memorable enough for people to remember it." "He is from Konoha," the Kazekage said, drawing everyone's attention to Menma, who was staring at the furious redhead. "He is one of your shinobi, and he is to blame for all of this." His hands were so tight on his sides, Menma just had to speak up. "Kazekage, I'm sorry. Who is he?" he asked softly, unable to even raise his eyes. That's where Menma froze. Even if he tried, he couldn't get it out. "Who is he?" he finally asked, looking the blonde straight in the eyes. Menma's gaze did not shy away. He just shook his head. Naruto laughed and decided to start the trouble. "Hey, oh come on Ataudo. Don't be ashamed of me now," he said, shocking the whole group. Everyone was staring at the Konoha group at this point. Was this someone in their family? "What? You didn't think just anyone could learn the Yondame's most prized possession, did you?" he asked rhetorically. Finally, the red-headed woman that had remained silent throughout the entire ordeal finally stepped forward. Naruto, she whispered. Her eyes were already full of tears. The man in front of her had hurt her heart too many times. Most of it was self-inflicted shots of pain, but this was on a whole new scale. This monster couldn't be her son. Naruto, why are you doing this? Naruto said, "Ah, Kasan," in a quieter voice than he had been using all day. There are definitely benefits to being in Uzumaki, right? He asked, ignoring her question. You haven't gotten any older. Even now he was. Naruto, please stop this. He stared at her for a few seconds before standing up. He turned around to face the sea. The day was absolutely beautiful to him. It was a cloudy day, but slivers of sunlight shone through the gaps in the clouds, making streams of light shoot down onto the water. There was a faint clap of thunder every few seconds, and there were short flashes of lightning that didn't break the clouds. It's a beautiful day, isn't it, Kasan? He asked, ignoring everyone else for the time being. It would seem that my hair color isn't the only thing I inexplicably acquired over the years that I share with you, he said with a chuckle, running his hand through his blood-red hair. Kushina couldn't think of anything to say. Everyone else was also a little at a loss for words. He seemed to be acting a little nicer with her than he did with everyone else, who he was always cryptically bugging. In a way, he seemed much gentler. He walked back to his seat and said, I guess that proves that I was right. He sat down and took Ino's hand. Tusan and I are more alike than I had imagined. Just as he put his books down for you, I put mine down as well, he said, looking at Ino. Kind of, he said. Ino pulled her mask away from her face. Aw, babe, she cooed as she slid off her throne and into his lap. Naruto chuckled. What a beautiful pair of young women we have here, Tusan, he said as Ino curled up against the side of his neck. So does Menma. I guess we just like strong women, he said with another chuckle. Kushina said, please, Naru-kun, as she shook her head. She couldn't figure out what was going on. How he knew what he was doing was right. Nothing made sense. He was attacking her mind with compliments. After everything he said, he still had the nerve to speak to them like everything was just completely normal. Please stop this, she said again, desperation pouring from her tone. Naruto just stopped altogether. He just stared at her in wonder. Then, as if someone flipped a switch, he went back to normal. I can't do that, Kasan. You know I'll die if I do, he said casually. I'll die if I don't as well, but since I've already started, I might as well make it count for something. Her pleading face continued to stare at him in confusion. Why are you doing this? Please, just tell me why, she begged. Naruto let out a sigh and looked up at the sky while thinking. He was trying to weigh his options right now. Kasan, I'm doing this because I want all of this to end. I want someone to make a world that is better than this, he said. In order for that to happen, it has to destroy itself. Everyone, including Kushina, was confused. The Raikage cut in before she could say anything. If it destroys itself, there will be nothing left for creation. Naruto just shook his head. No, Raikage, that's wrong, he said, tilting his head. Ino is kissing your neck like she's trying to count how many hickeys she can give you, he added. You see, creation and destruction go hand in hand. Think about how a man would cut down a tree to build a house, or how a group of men would cut down a forest to build a village. It's all a cycle of destroy to create again. Erase a man's mind and he's a new person. Erase the world and it gets a second chance at life. No matter what you believe, this world is doomed to fail. The world is not doomed, said the Mizukage with a bit of an edge to his tone. He said, for sick people like you, it's doomed because you can't control it. For sick people, like me, he said slowly, examining those words. It's funny how wrong you are, he said without thinking. I mean, if you think about it, there is more wrong with a man who resigns to being like everybody else. It's truly disturbing how each one of you are currently fighting for the right to walk around like dead fish floating down a stream rather than being an individual. Synchronization and normality have become the new social norm. But if you were to go back years ago during the days of the clan wars, they would have laughed at such a thing. He said, that's the real issue. I mean, you laugh at me because I'm different, but I laugh at you because you're all the same. Wink. Your ideas come from a psychotic mind, and only you and that dumb BTCH on your neck will understand them, said the wife of the Raikage, who hadn't said much up until this point. Ino's head popped up instantly and she stared at Naruto, who just threw his hands up in I don't know kind of pose. Ino got off his lap quietly and started walking toward the edge. It looked like she was going to step off, but as soon as she took that last step, there was a flash and she was inside the arena. Samui also showed up at the same time. She was much more alert now, though, seeing the intense look in the blonde's eyes briefly before she slipped her mask back on. Well, Naruto said, this looks like it could be fun.
This was it for today. I will continue this movie in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.